Guam and Hawaii are now within range of the tactical forces of the VCS. News of a cruise missile for the Su-57 has surfaced, and it is very unpleasant for the US. Also, new Lancets with homing systems will lead swarms of cheap drones into battle. But first things first. This is how the combination of the new long-range, low-observable cruise missile and the Su-57 is seen by Western publications. The news of a long-range Russian stealth cruise missile was one of the major and unpleasant sensations of Western military journals this November. To quote, "Bad news for us. Bad for our partners. The Russians, if they're not lying, managed to cram a strategic cruise missile into their stealth. Now their tactical link aircraft, with elements of stealth, can hit our key bases in the Pacific, Guam and Hawaii from Vladivostok. The worst part is that unlike the big long-range bombers of the VKS, we won't even be able to track them." So wrote recently in his account in social networks, not too friendly to our country, but quite famous in the World Resource 1945. I don't know what these guys found wrong with the news. I think she's great. We will only remind you that the island of Guam, in the Marianas Archipelago of the Pacific Ocean, is home to one of the largest strategic airbases of the U.S. Air Force, Andersen, from where B-52s once flew to bomb Vietnam. Today, it is officially one of the top 4 most important strategic military installations in the United States. It is home to the USAF's key 36th Air Wing of 16 strike and fighter squadrons, capable of controlling all Pacific trade routes and launching destructive strikes, including nuclear strikes. Well, Hawaii's pretty self-explanatory. A number of major U.S. naval bases, the legendary Pearl Harbor and all that. Both of these locations of America's strategic forces were still considered virtually invulnerable to any enemy strikes because of their remoteness and even lacked sufficient air defense forces, for it never occurred to the Americans that someone dangerous and inconspicuous could threaten them. Now obviously, all these naive previous notions need a radical revision. And he will pull another cyclopean strain on the U.S. military budget. To quote what else is being written in the West, air bases in the Russian Far East can now host Su-57s, and without additional refueling they will be able to launch direct missile strikes against Guam in the Pearl Harbor naval base of Hickam, for which the new low-observable missiles are designed. Apparently, they have a similar origin to the KH-101-102 missiles with a more compact body and a range of about 3,500 kilometers. Until then, ground-based tactical aviation units could not hit the area even theoretically, another Western military publication wrote. Adding that the United States will now have to invest billions in at least 20 missile defense sites on the islands, and given the location, this would translate into truly astronomical spending. Here's a photo of B-52 strategic bombers at Andersen Base, Guam Island. Today, they remain one of the most important elements of the U.S. nuclear triad. It must be said that recently the Russian defense complex has been constantly pleasing with good news. Enjoyable enough that many of them are already just becoming routine and running past the attention of the general public. For example, the Russian Air and Space Forces alone received at least 4 major new products between August and November 2023. Fab 1500 with controlled correction and planning module. The new long-range XBD cruise missile. Long-anticipated mass deliveries of a low-observable modification of the KH-59 OVAD Mk2 tactical missile. And the equally long-awaited integration of the lightweight, small missile Elmore missile into all major Army aviation. All of these products are by no means in the proverbial category. There are no analogs, and they are already being used here and now in our frontline and, no less importantly, strategic aviation. Such a dense flow of novelties in high demand by the troops was also pleasing because it meant a normal restructuring of the military industry and a real mobilization of forces in this direction. Plus, there are several new and very interesting types of drones, which will be discussed below, and about which we have also repeatedly told on our channel. Therefore, the main news of the first numbers of November this year about the appearance of a version of small-size strategic cruise missile KRBD for the Russian stealth Su-57. A lot of people were certainly pleased, but not that very surprised anymore. By the way, just the other day the troops should receive the next batch of these already very well proven aircraft. If you believe all sorts of Western resources studying satellite images from private and semi-spy space offices, is now in the final stages of flying the new low observable dry dock link. Once it joins the ranks of the Russian Air Force, we will finally have a full squadron of our homegrown Russian stealths. Reviews of their current combat work are now most positive. Looks like we got a really working 5th generation car. The Su-57, despite the small number of machines produced, is the most fought and effective fifth-generation aircraft to date. This year, the VCS will make up the first full squadron of the new stealths. But the real strong reaction among NATO military analysts and just professionals and amateurs of military aviation was not the imminent arrival of another 6 Su-57s in the ranks of the Air Force, according to Western observers, but a new long-range cruise missile for them, which the aircraft will be able to carry in its internal weapons compartment. NATO analysts fear that it is such missiles that could be the black swan for their hegemony in the Asia-Pacific region. Already, the Pentagon and USAF have had to invest more than $19 billion to modernize air defense forces on the islands. But this is what is called only a warm-up, because missile defense positioning areas for such facilities have always been a goldmine for the bulky and money-hungry American military-industrial complex. By the way, here's a beautiful photo of the Su-57 over the neutral waters of the Pacific Ocean. Now its appearance here will place a very different military burden on our partners. And one can only be happy for the various U.S. contractors, who will surely lose their hands in anticipation of another giant siphoning. And to our air and space forces, whose arsenal is becoming more diverse and flexible from day to day. This fall will surely go down in the history of Russian aviation as the most productive in terms of receiving the latest weapons. Now let's move on to drones. British intelligence recognizes our drone as the best. New homing Lancets will lead swarms of cheap drones into battle. What happened the day before is just a pattern breaker for me. A whole huge sheet on the verified social network page of one of the branches of the kingdom's intelligence services talked about the Russian Lancet drone, and without the slightest bit of ironic venom inherent in this kind of publications of the island press and official bodies. There, without any wagging or excuses, the Lancet was named the most productive and one of the best in its class. On the one hand, it should be obvious to a fool, but the Brits usually never give up in their never-ending desire to throw brown substance on the fan at every opportunity. I'll even give you a quote, for believe me that since around the end of World War II, such complimentary gestures toward our weapons systems have never been made by these nice people. So, Russia's Lancet single-use strike drones can be recognized as one of the most impressive weapons Russia has unveiled over the past 12 months. The Russian military uses these drones to hit the most important targets. These machines proved to be an excellent means of counter-battery warfare, knocking out the enemy's best artillery systems. They're used in conjunction with the Orlan 10. We'll add from ourselves that it's actually more common with the Hall's reconnaissance drones, and more recently with Pacers. But let's keep quoting. Prior to that, the Russians mostly used small drones only for reconnaissance. And Landsat can undoubtedly be called a serious step forward in the use of such weapons. End quote. By the way, and this is a photo of the Landsat drone at its first unveiling back in 2012. But let's move on. Probably, after all, the magic figure of 700, and at the time of creation of the material 731 proven episodes of combat use of the Russian drone, of which more than 600 can be recognized as successful, finally got them. This praise from a man completely alien to all sentimentality was preceded by a major article by David Hambling, an independent columnist for several major British magazines, who is regarded on the island as a guru in the field of robotic weapons systems. There, he called Lancets the most dangerous tactical level weapon in the Russians' arsenal. All such revelations from the Brits in the style of Captain Obvious, so that dear readers can understand, move me rather little. They'll come up with some crap about Lancets tomorrow, too, if the order is necessary. And they'll drag it from publication to publication. The purpose, it seems to me, of these verbiage is simple: to cover up one's own miscalculations in military planning, endless arrogance and obvious underestimation of the enemy. The fools, however, remain all sorts of political figures who have been lying for a year and a half about the decline and degradation of the Russian defense complex. But who in London cares about a former lady doctor who said something stupid? They just want to cover their own problems, and there are more and more of them. By the way, and this is what a kamikaze drone salvo looks like, and this is just an intermediate stage. The fact is that the Lancet family doesn't just land successfully in the here and now, it continues to evolve and, as they say in the West, grow its own ecosystem. The end of September marked the first time a number of new drones have been used with homing systems. Whereas before the drone was actually guided manually, it is now actively learning to select targets on its own. And this means that when it, as they call it, will be finished, and while there are some rough edges in its application, the relatively expensive Lancet, firstly, will receive an element of artificial intelligence, which the chief designer of the line of these wonderful drones, Alexander Zakharov, does not like to talk about, and secondly, will become a command center for a whole swarm of more budget drones. Similar to a Lancet but much cheaper scalpels. To Vostok are already being tested under combat conditions. Such Lancet-shaped drones will cost multiples of the price of a branded Lancet and, under its careful guidance, do comparable damage. And several other firms, including Zala itself, have similar studies underway. Actually, the late Soviet Union and then Russia pioneered the Wolfpack concept for anti-ship missiles, where one or more of them constituted a flying control center and were supposed to exchange information and target other projectiles to airborne U.S. warrants, highlighting priority targets. It was first used in our Navy's fairly common P-500 Basalt complex, adopted by Bezmologo half a century ago. So all these fashion trends were not born yesterday. Now imagine a swarm of multiple drone units like our best drone with their flight missions raiding an enemy location. Lancets are already whipped up only in exceptional cases, and if there are 100 or even more of them, and all at a price cheaper than any cruise missile, capable at best of hitting a single large target. Knowing the Hall's approach, I'm sure we'll be seeing a drone festival like this pretty soon. So we live in interesting times, and there will be even more interesting times to come.